bear cub was about to be electrocuted. What this baby did was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The morning sun filtered through the dense canopy of pine trees, casting dappled shadows across the forest floor. Nestled at the edge of the wilderness, the small village of Pine Haven slumbered peacefully, unaware of the drama about to unfold. In a small cottage with faded blue shutters and wildflowers growing along its stone path, little Willow James cooed softly in her wooden crib. At just 11 months old, she possessed an unusual sensitivity to the world around her. Her wide, curious eyes took in everything, and her tiny hands reached out to touch, to feel, to understand. Willow's mother, Eleanor, hummed softly as she kneaded bread dough by the window, occasionally glancing at her daughter with a smile. The front door stood ajar, allowing the sweet spring breeze to flow through the modest home. Outside, beyond Eleanor's vegetable garden, the forest stirred with life. Birds called to one another, squirrels darted between trees, and deeper within the woods, a mother bear named Luna guided her curious cub, Orion, through their morning foraging ritual. Luna was cautious by nature, her protective instincts sharpened by the recent increase in human activity near their territory. The forest had been their sanctuary for generations, but with each passing season, the human settlement grew, encroaching further into what was once wild domain. Luna had taught Orion to avoid humans at all costs, but the young cub's curiosity often overrode his mother's warnings. That morning, while Luna dug for grubs beneath a fallen log, Orion's attention wandered. A sweet, unfamiliar scent drifted on the breeze. Ripe apples that had fallen from the trees in Old Man Jenkins' orchard at the village edge. With one glance back at his mother, who remained absorbed in her foraging, Orion slipped away, his small paws padding silently over moss and fallen leaves. The cub's heart raced with excitement as he ventured closer to the village than he had ever been before. The scent grew stronger, guiding him toward the orchard where several apples lay scattered on the ground, their skin glistening with morning dew. But as Orion approached the orchard's edge, something else caught his attention. A flash of movement near the ground by an old wooden utility pole. 3 teenagers, Asher, Talia, and Dominic, lounged by the pole, passing a bottle between them and laughing too loudly for the early hour. They had skipped school to enjoy the spring day, finding amusement in their small rebellion. None of them noticed the frayed electrical wire dangling precariously from the pole, occasionally releasing blue sparks when the breeze pushed it against the metal hardware. "Hey, look," Asher nudged Dominic, pointing toward the tree line. "Is that a dog?" Dominic squinted, then grinned. "Nah, man, that's a bear cub." Talia sat up, suddenly alert. "A bear? Should we, call someone?" "Why?" Asher snorted. "It's just a baby, probably lost or something." Orion froze, suddenly aware of the humans watching him. Luna's warnings echoed in his mind, but the apple's scent overwhelmed his caution. He took another tentative step forward, unaware that he was moving closer to the damaged pole and its deadly wire. In the cottage, little Willow suddenly became restless. She pulled herself up to stand in her crib, her tiny fingers gripping the wooden rails as she stared intently toward the open door. Eleanor glanced up, noticing her daughter's unusual focus. "What is it, my little one?" she asked softly, wiping flour from her hands. "Do you see something interesting?" Willow babbled in response, her eyes never leaving the doorway. Outside, the teenagers had grown bolder. Dominic picked up a stick and tossed it near Orion, causing the cub to jump back in alarm. "Look how funny it moves," he laughed. "Throw another one." Talia hesitated. Maybe we should leave it alone. What if its mother is nearby? Don't be such a baby, Asher scoffed, grabbing another stick. We're just having some fun. As the second stick landed near Orion's paws, the cub stumbled backward, directly toward the dangling wire. A spark leaped from the wire to the damp ground, scorching a small patch of grass. The smell of burning vegetation filled the air, but the teenagers were too engrossed in their game to notice the danger. Eleanor stepped away from her bread-making, distracted by a knock at the back door. Mrs. Peterson, their elderly neighbor, needed help with her garden gate again. "Just a minute, Willow," Eleanor called as she hurried to the back of the cottage. "Mama will be right back." In that moment of distraction, Willow's instincts took over. With a determination that belied her age, she maneuvered her small body over the edge of the crib and down to the floor, her bare feet making soft padding sounds on the wooden planks as she toddled toward the open front door. Outside, Orion whimpered in confusion and fear. The teenagers' laughter grew louder as they continued their taunting, unaware of the sparking wire that now hung just inches from the cub's trembling body. One more step backward, and the curious little bear would make contact with the electrified ground, a touch that his small frame could never survive. Deep in the forest, Luna suddenly lifted her head, her maternal instincts flaring to life. Something was wrong. Her cub was missing, and danger hung in the air. With a low, rumbling growl, she abandoned her foraging and began to follow Orion's scent toward the village, and toward the impending tragedy that only an unlikely hero could prevent. Little Willow's tiny feet carried her unsteadily across the cottage floor, her determination unwavering despite her wobbling steps. The front door stood wide open, the spring breeze beckoning her forward, as if nature itself guided her path. Behind the cottage, Eleanor's voice mingled with Mrs. Peterson's, their conversation about the broken garden gate providing the perfect cover for Willow's escape. "I've been meaning to fix it myself," Mrs. Peterson was saying, her weathered hands gesturing animatedly. "But these old bones aren't what they used to be." Eleanor smiled sympathetically. "Let me grab my toolbox. I can have it fixed in no time." Neither woman noticed the silent drama unfolding at the front of the cottage as Willow crossed the threshold into the outside world. The grassy path felt cool and slightly damp beneath her bare feet, each step bringing her closer to the commotion by the old utility pole. Meanwhile, the situation with Orion had deteriorated further. The cub cowered against the base of an apple tree, his small body trembling with fear, as the teenagers grew increasingly bold in their taunting. The wire dangled dangerous inches away, its sparks becoming more frequent, as a light morning drizzle began to fall, creating an even more conductive environment. "Maybe we should go," Talia suggested again, looking nervously at the darkening sky. "I don't think we should be out here in the rain." "It's barely sprinkling," Asher retorted, his eyes never leaving the frightened cub. "Besides, this is just getting interesting." Dominic had found a longer stick, and he poked it toward Orion, forcing the cub to retreat further. "I bet I can make it stand on its hind legs," he boasted, jabbing the stick forward. Orion yelped, a high-pitched sound of distress that carried through the morning air. The sound reached Willow's ears as she toddled past her mother's garden, and something inside her responded to the cry. Her pace quickened as much as her unsteady legs would allow. In the forest, Luna heard her cub's cry too. Her massive body moved with surprising speed through the underbrush, branches snapping beneath her weight as maternal fury drove her forward. Birds took flight at her approach, and smaller creatures scurried for cover, sensing the dangerous combination of a mother bear's fear and rage. Back by the orchard, something unexpected happened. Just as Dominic's stick pushed Orion dangerously close to the sparking wire, a flash of movement caught Talia's attention. She turned to see a small figure in a pale yellow onesie, toddling determinedly toward them. "Oh my God," she gasped, grabbing Asher's arm. "There's a baby." Asher turned, his eyes widening in shock. Where the hell did it come from? "That's the James kid," Dominic said, lowering his stick slightly. "They live in that cottage over there." The teenagers froze in momentary confusion, their game forgotten as they watched little Willow approach. The baby girl showed no fear, her eyes fixed on the frightened bear cub with an expression of pure concern. Behind her, unnoticed by anyone, a dark shadow emerged from the forest's edge. Luna had arrived, and the sight of humans near her cub sent a ripple of protective fury through her massive frame. But something held the mother bear back. Some instinct more ancient than rage made her pause at the tree line, watching as the human infant toddled closer to her cub. There was something in the baby's approach that didn't register as threatening, something that made Luna wait and watch rather than charge forward in attack. "We should grab the kid," Talia said urgently, taking a step toward Willow. "It's not safe." Her words died in her throat as she finally noticed the sparking wire. In their focus on tormenting the bear cub, none of them had paid attention to the damaged electrical line that now hung perilously close to both Orion and the approaching baby. "Holy shit," Asher breathed, seeing the danger for the first time. "That wire's live?" The realization hit them all at once. They had been pushing the bear cub toward an electrified wire without even knowing it. Their thoughtless cruelty could have resulted in the cub's death. And now, a human baby was walking straight into the same danger. Dominic dropped his stick, his face pale. "We gotta get the kid." But before any of them could move, Willow did something none of them expected. She stopped a few feet away from Orion and sat down heavily on the damp grass. Then, with the universal language of a child who wants to make friends, she extended her small hand toward the frightened cub, palm up in an instinctive gesture of peace. "Bah," she cooed softly, the sound carrying across the suddenly silent orchard. Orion, who had been cowering in terror, lifted his head curiously. The tiny human made no threatening moves, showed no signs of the cruelty he had just experienced from the larger humans. Instead, there was something familiar in her gentle demeanor, a kindred innocence that spoke to his own. The teenagers stood frozen, watching in disbelief as the bear cub hesitantly moved away from the deadly wire and took a tentative step toward the baby. From the forest edge, Luna watched with equal amazement. Her maternal instincts conflicted between protecting her cub and recognizing that this small human posed no threat. A sudden, heavier spark from the wire illuminated the scene, casting everything in a brief blue glow. The sound of the electrical discharge seemed to break the spell, reminding everyone of the very real danger still present. "Willow? Willow!" Eleanor's panicked voice cut through the air as she rounded the corner of the cottage, her heart stopping at the sight of her baby sitting on the ground near a wild animal, with 3 teenagers standing nearby and a damaged electrical wire dangling overhead. "Oh my God, Willow!" She broke into a run, terror giving her speed. But as she approached, something even more unexpected happened. Something that would become the talk of Pinehaven for generations to come. Little Willow, in her innocent wisdom, did what the teenagers with all their supposed maturity had failed to do. She noticed the sparking wire. Her eyes tracked the blue flashes, and then, with a deliberateness that seemed impossible for a child her age, she pointed at the dangerous wire and made a loud, urgent sound of warning. "Ah! Ah!" she cried, pointing emphatically at the wire, then at Orion, then back at the wire again. It was as if she were trying to communicate the danger to everyone present, to the cub, to the teenagers, to her approaching mother, and even to Luna, watching from the edge of the forest. And somehow, miraculously, they all understood. Orion proper authorities decide who's acting in the best interests of this community. With that ominous promise, he turned and strode back to his luxury SUV, the vehicle's engine roaring to life as he departed in a spray of gravel that underscored his anger. Davis closed the barn door, turning to Eleanor with concern etched on his weathered face. That man is going to be trouble at the council meeting. He has influence, Eleanor, and he knows how to manipulate people's fears. But now we know for certain what this is really about, she replied, returning to Orion's stall where Willow had remained throughout the confrontation, her small hand resting protectively on the cub's head. It was never about concern for Willow's safety. It was about securing access to that protected forest for his logging operation. The sheriff nodded grimly. Knowing his motive helps, but it doesn't change the fact that those photographs exist, and to many people, they'll look damning regardless of context. Eleanor knelt beside Willow, who was watching them with that unsettling awareness that had become increasingly pronounced since the encounters with the bears began. "Did Orion really show you something about Drummond?" she asked gently. "About cutting trees?" Willow nodded solemnly. "In my head, like dreams, but awake. Bears know things, feel things, remember things." She stroked Orion's fur as the cub gazed at her with intelligent eyes. "They know forest better than people." Davis had moved closer, listening to this exchange with a mixture of wonder and skepticism. "Are you saying the bears are communicating with Willow through some kind of mental images, sharing memories or knowledge directly?" Eleanor looked up at him. "I know how it sounds, James. But after everything you've witnessed today, is it really any more incredible than what you've already seen with your own eyes?" The sheriff had no answer for that, and they lapsed into thoughtful silence as twilight deepened outside the barn. Dr. Wesley returned shortly thereafter, expressing pleasure at Orion's improved condition and cautious optimism about his recovery prospects. "He's young and resilient," the vet explained, as he checked the cub's vital signs. "The antibiotics are working, and the wound is already showing signs of healing. With continued treatment and proper care, he could be ready to return to the wild within a week." "Will he be strong enough to attend the council meeting tonight?" Eleanor asked, explaining her plan to demonstrate the extraordinary connection between Willow and the bears as a way of providing context for the controversial photographs. Dr. Wesley considered this, stroking his chin thoughtfully. "Medically speaking, a short trip shouldn't harm him as long as we maintain his IV and keep him warm. But are you sure exposing him to a potentially hostile audience is wise? Stress could impede his recovery." "It's a risk," Eleanor admitted, "but it might be our best chance of protecting both Orion's family and mine. People need to see what's really happening here, not just bear encounters frozen in misleading photographs, but the living reality of this connection." The vet looked to Davis, clearly expecting the sheriff to oppose such an unusual plan. But Davis, after witnessing the events in the forest and Drummond's revealing confrontation, had begun to see beyond his initial skepticism. "We'll take every precaution," he assured Dr. Wesley, "and at the first sign of distress from either the cub or the child, we remove them immediately. But Eleanor's right. The council needs to see this with their own eyes if they're going to make an informed decision." And so, as night fell over Pinehaven, a most unusual procession made its way toward the town hall, Sheriff Davis's patrol car leading, followed by Dr. Wesley's truck with Orion secured in a modified animal carrier in the back, IV stand beside him, and Eleanor's small sedan bringing up the rear with Willow safely buckled in her car seat. The town hall was packed when they arrived, curious citizens filling every seat and standing against the walls, drawn by rumors of both the bear cub's rescue and the controversial photographs of Eleanor and Willow with wild bears in the forest. A murmur ran through the crowd as Davis escorted Eleanor and Willow to seats at the front, while Dr. Wesley waited outside with Orion until they were ready to present their case. Mayor Collins called the emergency meeting to order, his expression grave as he outlined the situation for the assembled council members and citizens. "We're here to address two related matters of concern to our community," he began. "First, the allegation that Eleanor James has endangered her child through repeated contact with wild bears, and second, the presence of a bear cub currently receiving medical treatment within our town limits." Drummond, seated prominently among the council members, wasted no time in presenting his case. He displayed the controversial photographs on the large screen at the front of the hall, narrating with barely concealed outrage as images showed Eleanor and Willow in close proximity to Luna, Storm, and Orion at the forest's edge. "These photos clearly demonstrate a pattern of reckless behavior," he declared, pointing accusingly at the final image of Luna touching her nose to Willow's hand. "No responsible parent would allow their child this close to wild predators, much less encourage such dangerous interaction. For the safety of young Willow James, I move that the council recommend immediate intervention by Child Protective Services." A ripple of reaction moved through the crowd, some nodding in agreement, others looking troubled or uncertain. Eleanor felt a momentary panic rise in her chest at the thought of losing custody of Willow, but the warm pressure of her daughter's hand in hers provided an anchor of calm amid the storm. Mayor Collins turned to Eleanor, his expression neutral but his eyes kind. "Mrs. James, you have the right to respond to these allegations. The council will hear your explanation before taking any action." Eleanor rose slowly, facing the packed room with a steady gaze despite her racing heart. "Thank you, Mayor Collins. Before I explain the context of those photographs, I'd like to address the timing and motivation behind them. These images were taken without my knowledge by someone hired to follow and document my movements, not out of concern for my daughter's welfare, but to discredit me as an opponent of Howard Drummond's proposed logging expansion into protected bear habitat." Drummond surged to his feet. "That's an outrageous accusation. I demand—" "Please, Mr. Drummond," Mayor Collins interrupted, raising a hand for silence. "Mrs. James has the floor. You'll have an opportunity to respond afterward." Eleanor continued, her voice growing stronger as she recounted the events of that rainy morning by the orchard when Willow had first encountered Orion near the damaged power line, how the baby had somehow sensed the danger and warned the cub, preventing a tragedy that the teenager's reckless behavior had nearly caused. "What began that day wasn't reckless endangerment," she explained, "but the forging of an extraordinary connection between my daughter and these bears. A connection that defies conventional understanding but is nonetheless real and profound." She described the exchanges of gifts at the forest edge, Willow's accelerated development and unusual perceptiveness, and finally the events of that morning when Storm had indicated the trap and Luna had returned Willow's lost toy, clear evidence of deliberate, intelligent communication across species boundaries. Throughout her account, the crowd's skepticism was palpable, faces showing disbelief or concern that Eleanor might be suffering from some delusion that placed her child at risk. Even Mayor Collins looked troubled, exchanging glances with other council members that suggested they were considering Drummond's recommendation seriously. "Mrs. James," the mayor said carefully when she had finished, "while your account is extraordinary, you must understand how difficult it is to accept without evidence beyond your testimony. These photographs, regardless of who took them or why, Do show your child in close proximity to wild bears, animals that are, by their nature, unpredictable and potentially dangerous. This was the moment Eleanor had been preparing for. I understand your skepticism, Mayor Collins. That's why I've brought evidence that goes beyond words or still images. She turned to Sheriff Davis, who nodded and moved to the door, signaling to Dr. Wesley waiting outside. A hush fell over the town hall as the veterinarian entered, carefully guiding the wheeled carrier containing Orion, the bear cub's IV stand positioned beside him. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd, some people shifting in their seats as if preparing to flee should the wild animal somehow escape confinement. "This is Orion," Eleanor introduced, moving to stand beside the carrier as Dr. Wesley positioned it at the front of the hall. "The bear cub my daughter first encountered nearly a month ago. This morning, Sheriff Davis and I found him suffering from an infected wound in the forest, with his parents, Luna and Storm, clearly communicating their distress and need for help." Drummond scoffed loudly. "This is absurd. You're anthropomorphizing wild animals, attributing human emotions and reasoning to instinctive behavior. Those bears weren't asking for help. They were probably defending their territory or their young." "Then, how do you explain this, Howard?" Eleanor challenged, gesturing for Willow to join her beside Orion's carrier. The child approached without hesitation, kneeling beside the cage and reaching her small hand through the bars to gently touch the cub's head. The crowd held its collective breath, many leaning forward in their seats to better observe this extraordinary tableau. Orion, who had been lying quietly in his carrier, visibly perked up at Willow's touch, making a soft sound of recognition as he shifted to press his head more firmly against her hand. "Orion better now," Willow said clearly, her voice carrying in the hushed room. "Medicine helping. Soon go home to Mama and Papa Bear." The simple statement, delivered with such certainty from a child who should barely be forming sentences, caused a stir among the assembled citizens. Dr. Wesley stepped forward, addressing the council directly. "As the attending veterinarian, I can confirm that this bear cub is responding to treatment for a severe infection that would likely have been fatal without intervention. What I cannot explain through any conventional veterinary knowledge is the apparent bond between this child and the cub, a bond that seems to have a calming effect that significantly reduces the animal's stress during treatment." Mayor Collins looked genuinely perplexed, his brow furrowed as he studied the interaction between Willow and Orion. "Sheriff Davis, you were present during the rescue of this cub. What did you observe?" Davis cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable being the center of attention but determined to speak the truth. "I observed behavior from the adult bears that I cannot explain through any traditional understanding of wild animal behavior. They appeared to deliberately communicate their cub's distress, guide us to his location, and then entrust him to our care. Actions that suggest reasoning and trust that should be impossible in wild animals." "Preposterous," Drummond interrupted again, his face flushing with anger. "Next, you'll be claiming these bears can talk. This is exactly the kind of irrational emotionalism that blocks progress and economic development in our community. These are wild animals, not Disney characters with human feelings and thoughts." As if in direct response to Drummond's outburst, Orion suddenly made a series of soft sounds, not aggressive growls, but something almost conversational in nature. Willow tilted her head as if listening, then turned to look directly at the businessman, her young face solemn but her eyes flashing with determination. "Orion says you hurt Forrest," she announced clearly, pointing an accusatory finger at Drummond. "Cut trees where bears sleep, scare animals away, make traps." A shocked silence fell over the town hall, all eyes moving between the small child and the now pale businessman. How could Willow know about logging operations or traps unless someone had told her? And given her age and vocabulary limitations, who could have provided such specific information in terms she would understand? Eleanor, as startled as anyone by her daughter's declaration, suddenly remembered Willow's earlier statement in the barn. Orion showed me. In here, man with loud voice, cutting trees, bears running away. Could it be possible that some form of direct communication, images or impressions, was passing between the cub and the child, conveying information beyond what either could express in conventional language? Drummond had recovered enough to attempt damage control, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow in the tense atmosphere. Are we really going to take the babbling of a toddler as evidence? This is getting ridiculous. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and Mayor Collins, studying Drummond thoughtfully, seemed to be considering possibilities beyond the businessman's dismissive explanation. Mr. Drummond, the council is aware that your company holds permits for selective logging in certain areas adjacent to Pine Haven, but not to my knowledge in the protected habitat where these bears reside. Have there been unauthorized activities that the council should be aware of? The question, delicately phrased but pointed in its implication, caused Drummond to shift uncomfortably in his seat. Of course not, Mayor. My operations are fully compliant with all regulations and permits. It might have ended there, a momentary discomfort, but no real consequences, had another unexpected development not altered the course of events. The door to the town hall swung open, admitting Officer Chen, her expression urgent as she hurried to Sheriff Davis and whispered something in his ear. The sheriff's eyes widened, and he immediately moved to the podium, interrupting whatever Mayor Collins had been about to say. I apologize for the interruption, but we have a situation developing that the council and citizens should be aware of. Luna and Storm, the adult bears, have been spotted at the edge of town. A ripple of alarm passed through the crowd, some people rising from their seats in fear, while others pressed closer to hear what Davis would say next. They're not displaying any aggressive behavior, he clarified quickly, calming the initial panic. But they appear to be following the path we took when bringing Orion into town. They're currently at the eastern perimeter, near the Anderson farm, under observation but not approaching any residences. Willow, who had been continuing her quiet communion with Orion, suddenly looked up, her face brightening. They come for Orion, she said simply, to check, to see if better. The explanation, delivered with such confidence from one so young, silenced the nervous murmuring that had begun at Davis's announcement. Eleanor moved to kneel beside her daughter, meeting her eyes directly. Willow, are you saying Luna and Storm are here to check on Orion, that they've followed his scent to find him? The child nodded, as if explaining something obvious to adults who were being unnecessarily slow to understand. They worry, like you worry for me when sick. This simple comparison, the universal parental concern that transcended species boundaries, resonated through the room, touching something fundamental in every parent present. Eleanor saw several mothers exchange glances, their expressions softening as they considered the situation from a new perspective. Mayor Collins, observing this shift in the room's emotional atmosphere, made a decision that would prove pivotal for Pine Haven's future. I propose that we adjourn to the Anderson farm to observe these bears from a safe distance. If what Mrs. James and her daughter are suggesting is true, if these wild animals have indeed tracked their cub into town out of parental concern rather than aggression, then we need to witness it for ourselves before making any decisions about either the bears or the James family. Drummond began to object, but found himself suddenly isolated as most council members and citizens voiced support for the mayor's suggestion. Within minutes, the meeting had relocated, a caravan of vehicles proceeding cautiously to the Anderson property where Luna and Storm had been sighted. Upon arrival, they found the two bears maintaining a respectful distance from the farm buildings, positioned at the forest edge where they could observe the barn without encroaching on human territory. Their behavior was remarkable not for what they were doing, but for what they weren't doing. Displaying no aggression, making no threatening movements, simply waiting and watching with what could only be described as patient concern. At Davis's direction, the townspeople remained in their vehicles, or at a safe designated distance, observing as Eleanor, Willow, Dr. Wesley, and the sheriff carefully brought Orion's carrier outside, positioning it where the adult bears could see their cub. The moment of recognition was immediate and unmistakable, both bears perking up, Luna making a soft huffing sound that carried clearly across the distance between them. Willow, holding tightly to her mother's hand, looked up with quiet certainty. "Can I show them? Show Orion better?" Eleanor glanced at Davis, who gave a cautious nod. "Stay right beside her," he instructed. "At the first sign of anything concerning, we bring her back immediately." Together, mother and daughter approached to within about 30 feet of the bears, close enough for clear visibility, but maintaining a respectful distance that acknowledged the wild nature of these creatures despite their unusual behavior. Willow waved her small hand in greeting, then pointed deliberately to Orion in his carrier, making a series of gestures that seemed to indicate treatment, healing, and eventual return to the forest. Whether the bears understood the specific gestures was impossible to determine, but they clearly recognized Willow and appeared to comprehend that their cub was being cared for rather than harmed. Luna sat back on her haunches, a posture of reduced tension that communicated more clearly than words that she perceived no threat in the current situation. The assembled townspeople watched in amazed silence as this extraordinary interaction unfolded. A young child somehow communicating across species barriers that most adults had long considered impenetrable. Even Drummond, standing apart from the main group with arms folded defensively across his chest, seemed unable to entirely dismiss what was happening before his eyes. Mayor Collins approached Eleanor as she and Willow rejoined the human group, his expression thoughtful. "Mrs. James, I believe we owe you an apology. Whatever is happening between your daughter and these bears is clearly something beyond ordinary understanding, but it's equally clear that there's no danger to Willow in these interactions. Quite the opposite, in fact." Eleanor nodded gratefully, but her attention was drawn to Drummond, who had moved away from the group and was speaking urgently into his phone, his back turned as if to prevent others from overhearing his conversation. Something about his furtive manner triggered an alarm in her mind. "Sheriff," she said quietly, drawing Davis aside, "I'm concerned about what Drummond might be planning. He has too much invested in discrediting these bears' protected status to simply accept what's happening here." Davis followed her gaze, his expression hardening as he observed the businessman's secretive behavior. "I'll have Chen keep an eye on him. If he's planning something that might endanger either the bears or this community, we'll be ready." The crowd began to disperse as the evening grew later, many of the townspeople approaching Eleanor to express amazement at what they had witnessed or to apologize for having doubted her account. By unspoken consensus, the formal council decision was postponed until the following day, though the shift in public opinion was already evident in the changed atmosphere. Dr. Wesley advised returning Orion to the barn for the night to continue his treatment, with the promise that updates on his condition would be provided to Luna and Storm through regular visits to the forest edge. Whether the adult bears truly understood this arrangement was impossible to determine, but they departed peacefully as darkness fell, melting back into the forest with a final glance toward the barn where their cub would spend the night. As Eleanor tucked an exhausted Willow into bed in their cottage later that night, the child's eyes were already closing. her small body surrendering to sleep after the emotional intensity of the day. Yet, just before drifting off, she murmured words that would echo in Eleanor's mind through the dark hours that followed. Bears say, "Watch out. Bad man planning bad thing tonight." The call came at 2:17 a.m., jarring Eleanor from troubled sleep. Sheriff Davis's voice was tight with urgency as he delivered news that sent her stumbling from bed, pulling on clothes with shaking hands. "There's been a fire set at the Anderson barn," he reported grimly. "We've evacuated Orion and Dr. Wesley, and the fire department is responding, but I think you should get down here. Something doesn't feel right about this." Eleanor called Mrs. Peterson, who arrived within minutes to stay with the still sleeping Willow, then drove through the darkened village toward the Anderson farm, her headlights catching glimpses of other vehicles also converging on the scene. The night sky glowed orange with reflected flames as she approached, and she could see firefighters working to contain the blaze that had already consumed half the barn's ancient wooden structure. Davis met her at the perimeter established by emergency responders, his face grim in the firelight. "Orion's safe," he assured her immediately. Dr. Wesley had him in the truck within minutes of the alarm. But this was deliberate, Eleanor. Someone broke the lock on the barn door and used accelerant to start the fire. "Drummond," she said without hesitation, remembering Willow's warning. "He couldn't let the council accept what they saw today. It would have blocked his logging plans permanently." The sheriff nodded grimly. "I've sent Chen to bring him in for questioning, but there's more. The fire appears to have been a diversion. While everyone was responding here, someone broke into the wildlife management office and stole equipment, including several of the bear traps that were scheduled to be set in the forest." Eleanor's blood ran cold as the implications became clear. "He's going after Luna and Storm, using the fire to draw attention here while he sets traps for them in the forest." "That's my guess," Davis confirmed. "But we can't prove anything yet, and we don't know where in the forest he might be setting those traps. It's too vast an area to search effectively in the dark." A soft, whimpering sound drew their attention to Doctor Wesley's truck, where Orion was becoming increasingly agitated, pacing the confines of his carrier and making distressed noises unlike anything they had heard from him before. "He knows," Eleanor realized, moving closer to the cub. "Somehow he knows his parents are in danger." As she approached the truck, another vehicle pulled up nearby, Mrs. Peterson's ancient station wagon, with Willow's small face visible in the passenger window. The elderly woman rolled down her window looking apologetic. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. She woke up crying that the bears needed help, and nothing I said would calm her. She insisted I bring her here." Before Eleanor could respond, Willow had unbuckled herself and was scrambling from the car, her little legs carrying her straight to Orion's carrier with surprising speed. The moment they were face to face, a palpable connection seemed to form between child and cub. Willow's expression solemn as she placed her hand against the carrier door. "They in trouble," she said clearly, turning to the adults with urgent focus. "Traps in forest, near big rock that looks like bear." Davis knelt beside her, his skepticism of earlier days now replaced by hard-earned belief in the child's unusual perceptions. "A rock that looks like a bear. Do you know where that is, Willow?" The child nodded emphatically. "Where bears sleep. Big cave under Bear Rock. Home." Eleanor exchanged a glance with Davis, both recognizing the significance of this information. "She's describing the den where we found Orion this morning. If Drummond knows about that location, it would be the perfect place to set traps. Catching Luna and Storm as they returned to their home." The sheriff straightened, decision crystallizing in his expression. "We need to get there immediately. If traps have been set, those bears could be in serious danger, especially if they're returning to check on their cub. "I'm coming with you," Eleanor insisted, already moving toward her car. Davis didn't argue, recognizing that Eleanor's familiarity with the forest path and Willow's connection to the bears might prove crucial in the coming hours. They quickly arranged for Mrs. Peterson to take Willow back to the cottage, despite the child's protests, and for Dr. Wesley to remain with Orion at a secure location. As they prepared to depart, however, Orion's distress suddenly increased, his cries becoming more urgent and his attempts to escape his carrier growing frantic. At the same moment, Willow went rigid in Mrs. Peterson's arms, her eyes widening as if seeing something invisible to the others. "Too late," she whispered, her voice hollow with dread. "Luna caught. Hurting. Storm trying to help." The declaration sent a chill through all who heard it, the impossibility of such knowledge overwhelmed by the conviction in the child's voice and the simultaneous escalation of Orion's distress. Davis didn't waste time questioning further, instead issuing rapid orders to the emergency personnel and transforming their planned expedition into a full rescue operation. Within minutes, a team was assembled. Davis, Eleanor, Officer Chen, Dr. Wesley, who insisted on coming to provide medical assistance if needed, and 2 firefighters with wilderness experience and emergency equipment. They departed in 2 off-road vehicles, following Eleanor's directions toward the den where they had found Orion earlier that day. The forest at night was a different world, shadows stretching between trees like living things, every sound amplified in the darkness. Their vehicle headlights carved tunnels of visibility through the gloom as they followed the rough path as far as possible before continuing on foot, powerful flashlights illuminating the way ahead. Eleanor led them unerringly, her maternal determination providing a clarity of purpose that cut through fear and uncertainty. The bearing-shaped rock formation appeared in their flashlight beams after 30 minutes of careful progress, its massive silhouette looming against the night sky like a sentinel guarding the den beneath it. What they found there confirmed their worst fears. Luna was indeed caught in a trap, the vicious metal teeth clamped around her right hind leg. Blood darkened her fur, and though she was clearly in pain, she made no aggressive movements as the humans approached, either from weakness or from some deeper understanding that they might represent help rather than further threat. Storm paced anxiously nearby, occasionally nudging Luna gently or making soft sounds that seemed intended to comfort his mate. When the rescue party appeared, he initially moved into a defensive position, his massive body interposed between the approaching humans and the injured Luna. But something in their demeanor, or perhaps recognition of Eleanor from their earlier encounters, caused him to hesitate rather than charge. Dr. Wesley assessed the situation quickly, his medical training extending to wildlife despite his primary practice with domestic animals. "The trap has severed blood vessels and possibly damaged tendons," he reported grimly. "She needs immediate treatment once we free her, or she could bleed out." "How do we release the trap without getting mauled?" Officer Chen asked, eyeing Storm's imposing presence with understandable caution. The question hung in the air, presenting a seemingly impossible dilemma. To approach Luna meant coming within striking distance of Storm, whose behavior, though currently restrained, could turn aggressive if he perceived the humans as threatening his injured mate. The solution came from an unexpected source. From the darkness behind them emerged Howard Drummond, his expensive clothes torn and dirty, his face pale in the flashlight beams suddenly directed his way. He held his hands up in a gesture of surrender, Davis's gun trained steadily on his chest. "I can release the trap," he said, his voice hollow with what sounded remarkably like remorse. "I said it. I know how to disarm it safely." Davis kept his weapon leveled at the businessman. "And why would you suddenly want to help the bears you've been trying to eliminate, Howard?" Drummond's gaze dropped, unable to meet the accusation in the sheriff's eyes. "Because I saw something I can't explain. Something that made me question everything I thought I knew." He gestured toward the trees behind him, where two small figures now emerged into the circle of light. Mrs. Peterson and Willow, the elderly woman looking apologetic while the child moved with purposeful determination toward the injured bear. "She appeared at my car as I was setting the last trap," Drummond explained, his voice unsteady. "Just standing there in the darkness, staring at me, and the way she looked at me, it was like she could see right through me, right into my soul. Then she said, 'Bears are people too, just different bodies,' and I couldn't go through with it." Eleanor rushed to Willow, gathering her into a protective embrace. "How did you get here, sweetie? You were supposed to stay with Mrs. Peterson at home." The elderly woman shook her head in bewilderment. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. I tucked her into bed and sat in the living room to read. The next thing I knew, she was gone, the front door open and her coat missing. I searched everywhere, then drove back toward the Anderson farm. I found her on the road, getting into Howard Drummond's car. I followed them here." Willow seemed unconcerned by the adult's alarm, her attention focused entirely on Luna. "She hurting," the child said simply, trying to move toward the injured bear despite Eleanor's restraining arms. "Need to help now." Davis kept his gun trained on Drummond, skepticism evident in his stance. "This convenient conversion doesn't erase what you've done, Howard. Setting that fire endangered lives, and these illegal traps constitute numerous violations of wildlife protection laws." "I know," Drummond acknowledged, his shoulders slumping in defeat, "and I'll face whatever consequences come. But right now, that bear needs help, and I'm the one who can release the trap most safely." After a moment's tense consideration, Davis nodded, though he maintained his vigilant stance as Drummond carefully approached the injured Luna. Storm growled a warning, but remarkably made no move to attack, as the man knelt beside the trap mechanism. "Easy, big fellow," Drummond murmured, his hands moving deliberately to the release mechanism. "I'm trying to help her now." With a metallic snap, the trap jaws released, freeing Luna's injured leg. Dr. Wesley moved in immediately, administering a mild sedative to keep the bear calm, while he applied pressure bandages to control the bleeding. "She'll need surgery," he announced after his initial assessment. "The wounds are deep, but if we can get her to a proper facility, there's a good chance she'll recover full mobility." The question of how to transport an injured adult bear through miles of forest in the middle of the night presented yet another seemingly insurmountable challenge. But as the adults deliberated, Willow once again demonstrated that extraordinary connection that had brought them all to this point. Breaking free from her mother's hold, she approached Storm without fear, making those same gestures they had observed earlier, communications that somehow bridged the species divide. The massive bear lowered his head to the child's level, listening with what appeared to be focused attention as Willow pointed to Luna, then to the humans, then made a carrying motion with her small arms. "He help," she announced, turning back to the stunned adults. "Storm help carry Luna." And incredibly, unbelievably, that's exactly what happened. Under Willow's apparent guidance, Storm positioned himself beside his injured mate, allowing the humans to carefully shift Luna onto a makeshift stretcher made from emergency blankets and poles that could be secured to Storm's broad back. The bear didn't resist, as Davis and Dr. Wesley worked to stabilize this unusual arrangement, his dark eyes fixed on Willow as if drawing reassurance from the child's calm certainty. "I've been a veterinarian for 30 years," Dr. Wesley muttered as they worked. "And I've never seen anything like this. It defies everything I was taught about wild animal behavior." "Maybe that's the problem," Eleanor suggested quietly, watching her daughter's gentle interaction with the massive predator that most humans would flee from in terror. "Maybe what we've been taught about the barriers between species is simply wrong. Maybe children like Willow haven't yet learned those barriers, so they remain able to connect in ways we've forgotten." The journey back through the nighttime forest became a procession unlike any Pinehaven had witnessed before. Humans and bear moving together with common purpose, united by concern for the injured Luna, and guided by the unwavering certainty of a child too young to have learned what should be impossible. By the time they reached the edge of town, word had spread, and citizens gathered to witness this extraordinary sight. Storm carrying his injured mate, escorted by the sheriff, a veterinarian, and a mother and child whose connection to these wild creatures had rewritten the community's understanding of the natural world. In the days that followed, as Luna received treatment and began her recovery in a specially prepared enclosure at the edge of the forest, the story of Pinehaven's bear family and the child who had bridged the divide between their worlds spread far beyond the village boundaries. Wildlife experts, scientists, and curious visitors arrived to observe the phenomenon firsthand, their initial skepticism inevitably giving way to wonder as they witnessed interactions that defied conventional understanding. Howard Drummond, facing charges for the barn fire and illegal trapping, made no attempt to deny his actions. Instead, in a move that stunned the community, he announced the permanent donation of his company's forest holdings to a wildlife conservation trust, ensuring that Luna, Storm, Orion, and their descendants would always have a protected home in the forests surrounding Pinehaven. "I've spent my life believing that progress meant conquering nature," he explained at a community gathering 3 weeks after that pivotal night. "It took a child to show me that true progress might mean something entirely different, learning to communicate across the boundaries that separate us from the natural world, rather than simply dominating it." As for Willow, she continued to develop in ways that both delighted and occasionally unnerved her mother, her speech advancing rapidly, her awareness of the natural world extending far beyond what a child her age should comprehend. The bears became regular visitors to the edge of the James property, maintaining a respectful distance from the cottage, but clearly maintaining that unusual connection that had formed on a rainy morning by the orchard. Dr. Mitchell, observing Willow's development with professional interest, suggested that what they were witnessing might be the emergence of abilities that humans had possessed in ancient times, but had gradually lost as civilization separated them from the natural world. Perhaps certain children, under the right circumstances, can still access those dormant capacities, she proposed during one of Willow's checkups. And if what we're seeing with Willow isn't unique, if other children have this potential, then what does that suggest about our future relationship with the natural world? It was a question that Eleanor often pondered as she watched her daughter playing in the garden, naming birds and insects with uncanny accuracy, or sitting quietly beneath the apple tree, eyes closed as if listening to voices beyond human hearing. The extraordinary events of that spring and summer had opened doors of perception that could never be closed again, not just for Willow, but for an entire community whose understanding of their place in the natural world had been fundamentally transformed. 6 months after Orion's rescue, on a crisp autumn morning, Eleanor stood at the forest edge watching Luna, Storm, and their fully recovered cub foraging among fallen leaves. Luna's injured leg had healed remarkably well, leaving only a slight limp for Orion, weakened by a mysterious illness that had struck suddenly and severely, lay curled in their emergency den. His breathing labored and his normally playful spirit subdued. Luna paced anxiously around her suffering cub, while Storm stood guard at the den entrance, his massive form silhouetted against the night sky as he gazed in the direction of Pine Haven, and the small cottage where the only creature who might understand their need now slept, unaware of the new crisis unfolding in the darkness of the forest. Dawn broke over Pine Haven in shades of pearl and gold, the rising sun casting long shadows across Eleanor's garden as she sat on the porch steps, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. She hadn't slept well, her mind churning with worries about the photographs and what they might mean for her and Willow. Inside the cottage, her daughter still slept, mercifully unaware of the storm gathering around them. The sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor long before Eleanor spotted Sheriff Davis's patrol car coming up the lane. She set her tea aside and stood, squaring her shoulders for what she suspected would be a difficult conversation. Davis looked uncomfortable as he approached, his hat in his hands and his normally direct gaze avoiding hers. "Morning, Eleanor," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Need to talk to you about something." "The photographs," she said, saving him the awkward introduction. "I've heard about them." He nodded, relief flashing briefly across his weathered face. "Then you know I'm here officially. Got a complaint filed yesterday evening." "Child endangerment." The words clearly pained him to say. "Howard Drummond?" Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer. "Among others," Davis admitted. "The photos have folks concerned, Eleanor. A child that young, that close to wild bears, you have to understand how it looks." Eleanor motioned toward the porch steps. "Sit with me a minute, James." Using his first name, something she rarely did, was deliberate, an appeal to their long friendship rather than his official capacity. The sheriff hesitated, then settled his large frame beside her on the steps. For a moment, they sat in silence, watching the morning light strengthen across the valley. "Those photos don't tell the whole story," Eleanor finally said. "You know that. You were there after the first encounter." Davis sighed, turning his hat in his hands. "I saw the aftermath, not what happened before. And what I saw was unusual enough. Those teenagers swearing the bears responded to your baby's warnings. Old Man Jenkins, claiming the male bear deliberately created a safe path around the power line. It was already stretching belief, Eleanor. But you believed it," she pressed. "You were there. You saw something extraordinary had happened." "I saw something I couldn't explain," he conceded. "That's not the same as endorsing you taking Willow into the forest to meet those same bears again. Bears are wild animals. Their behavior can't be predicted no matter how gentle they seemed that day." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, gathering her thoughts. "What if I told you their behavior has been absolutely consistent? That the connection formed that day has only grown stronger? That they've been communicating with us in ways that defy everything we've been taught about animal intelligence?" Davis's skepticism was evident in his silence, but the lack of immediate dismissal gave Eleanor hope. She pressed on, describing the exchanges of gifts, Willow's accelerated development, and finally, their most recent forest meeting where Storm had identified the trap and Luna had returned Willow's lost toy. "You're saying they understand human language?" Davis asked, his tone carefully neutral, but his eyes troubled. "That they're leaving gifts intentionally?" "Eleanor, do you hear how this sounds?" "I know exactly how it sounds," she admitted. "If I hadn't witnessed it myself, I'd think I was having a breakdown. But Willow has witnessed it too. So have the teenagers. And I believe, deep down, you know something extraordinary is happening. Otherwise, you wouldn't have warned me about the traps. You would have just let the wildlife management team do their job." The sheriff had no immediate response to that, his discomfort evident in the way he continued turning his hat in his hands. Finally, he sighed heavily. "Drummond's pushing hard for an investigation. He's got the ear of Mayor Collins and half the town council. There's talk of having Willow placed in temporary custody while they evaluate your fitness as a parent." The threat, though expected, still hit Eleanor like a physical blow. "They want to take my daughter." "They're concerned for her safety," Davis corrected gently. And without context, those photos paint a disturbing picture. "Then I need to provide context," Eleanor said firmly. "I need to show people what's really happening between Willow and these bears. Help them understand that this isn't a case of reckless endangerment, but something miraculous." Davis looked skeptical. "How exactly do you plan to do that?" "You can't exactly schedule a demonstration with wild bears." Before Eleanor could respond, a sound from inside the cottage caught their attention. Willow's voice, unusually clear and agitated. "Ma! Ma! Orion's sick! Hurry!" Eleanor was on her feet instantly, Davis right behind her as they rushed into the cottage. They found Willow standing in her crib, her small face flushed and her eyes wide with distress. She held her stuffed bear clutched tightly to her chest, rocking it as one might comfort an ailing child. "Orion's sick," she repeated, looking directly at Eleanor with an intensity that made the sheriff step back in surprise. "Need help. Now." Davis stared at the child, his skepticism visibly shaken by the advanced speech and obvious distress from a child who should barely be forming basic words. "How does she know that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor shook her head, lifting Willow from the crib and holding her close. "I don't know. But ever since the first encounter, she's shown an awareness of the bears that goes beyond anything I can explain. And she's never been wrong." "Sick," Willow insisted, struggling in her mother's arms and pointing toward the window that faced the forest. "Bad sick. Help!" Davis ran a hand over his face, conflict evident in his expression. "Eleanor, you can't be thinking of going into that forest again. Not with those photos circulating and Drummond pushing for intervention." "Look at her, James," Eleanor said quietly, nodding toward Willow, who continued to rock her stuffed bear with obvious distress. "She knows something's wrong. And if she's right, if Orion is sick or injured, then Luna and Storm might be desperate enough to come looking for help. Imagine what would happen if those bears approached the village right now, with everyone already on edge." The sheriff's face paled at the thought. A panicked response to bears entering the village could lead to disaster, for the animals and potentially for humans as well. "What do you suggest?" he asked, the question itself an admission that he was taking the situation seriously. Eleanor's mind raced, trying to formulate a plan that would address both Willow's distress and the larger crisis looming over them. "I need to check on the cub," she said finally. "But I can't risk having more photographs taken, and I can't risk Willow being removed from my care." She turned to Davis, a desperate plea in her eyes. "Come with us. Be an official witness. See for yourself what happens when Willow interacts with these bears. If you still believe I'm endangering her afterward, I'll accept whatever consequences come." Davis stared at her for a long moment, then at Willow, who had gone quiet but continued rocking her stuffed bear with unusual focus. The sheriff was a by-the-book man, but he was also fair and open-minded. And like everyone else in Pine Haven, he had heard the stories of that rainy morning by the orchard, stories too consistent and too extraordinary to dismiss completely. "This is against my better judgment," he said finally, reaching for his radio, "but I'll go with you. And I'm calling in backup, not to interfere, but to secure a perimeter and make sure no one else wanders into a potentially dangerous situation." Eleanor nodded, grateful for his cautious support. "That's all I ask. Just see for yourself before you decide." As Davis stepped outside to radio for assistance, Eleanor quickly dressed Willow and packed a small bag with supplies, including a child's medicine kit and some of the honey they had been leaving at the forest edge. She had no idea if any human medications would help a bear cub, but the honey might provide energy if Orion was weakened. When she rejoined Davis outside, he was speaking quietly with his deputy, a young woman named Officer Chen, who had moved to Pine Haven the previous year. Chen looked skeptical, but determined as Davis explained the situation. "We're creating a secure perimeter at the forest edge," he informed Eleanor. "Officer Chen will ensure no civilians enter the area while we investigate your claims." The careful phrasing made it clear that Davis was framing this as an official investigation rather than an expedition to find potentially sick bears, giving himself professional cover for what might otherwise seem like a wildly inappropriate action for a law enforcement officer. "Thank you," Eleanor said simply, adjusting Willow on her hip. The child had gone quiet but remained alert, her eyes fixed on the forest with unwavering focus. "If at any point I feel the situation is becoming dangerous, we leave immediately," Davis said firmly. "No arguments, no delays. Understood?" Eleanor nodded her agreement, and the small group set off toward the forest edge, Officer Chen peeling away to begin establishing the perimeter as they approached the tree line. News would spread quickly through Pine Haven's gossip network that something was happening at the James property, but at least there wouldn't be photographers or curious onlookers getting close enough to interfere. As they entered the forest, Willow became increasingly agitated, squirming in Eleanor's arms and pointing forward with urgent sounds. "This way. Hurry." Davis watched the child with a mixture of amazement and concern. "She's directing us?" "She seems to know where they are," Eleanor confirmed, following Willow's insistent gestures deeper into the woods. They walked for nearly 20 minutes, the forest growing denser around them. Davis kept one hand near his sidearm, his gaze constantly scanning their surroundings for danger. Despite his willingness to accompany them, his law enforcement training and natural caution kept him on high alert. Willow suddenly went still in Eleanor's arms, her small body tensing. "Close," she whispered, "very close." As if on cue, a low rumbling sound emerged from the undergrowth ahead, not aggressive, but undeniably the sound of a large animal. Davis moved instinctively in front of Eleanor and Willow, his hand now resting on his weapon though he hadn't drawn it. "Easy," Eleanor cautioned him. "Let's see who it is before we react." The undergrowth parted, and Storm emerged into the small clearing where they stood. The massive bear looked even larger in the filtered forest light, his dark fur gleaming with health, and his movements deliberate as he approached to within 20 feet of the humans before stopping. Davis inhaled sharply, but maintained his composure, his years of training evident in his controlled response to what must have been a deeply unsettling sight. "My God," he breathed, "he's enormous." Storm regarded them with intelligent eyes, his gaze moving from Davis to Eleanor and finally settling on Willow with obvious recognition. The bear made a soft huffing sound, then turned and looked back the way he had come, clearly indicating they should follow. "He wants us to go with him," Eleanor explained, though the bear's intent was remarkably clear, even without interpretation. "Eleanor, you can't be serious," Davis began, but his protest died in his throat as Willow suddenly called out to the bear, "Storm! Orion's sick! Show us!" The bear's reaction to the child's voice was immediate and astonishing. He turned back to them, making another huffing sound that seemed almost like confirmation, then again indicated they should follow. "James," Eleanor said softly to the sheriff, "I know this defies everything you've been taught about wild animals. But please, just observe with an open mind. Something extraordinary is happening here. Something that might be more important than any of us realize." The conflict was evident on Davis's face, duty and training warring with the undeniable evidence before his eyes of animal behavior that simply couldn't be explained by conventional understanding. Finally, he gave a tight nod. "I'll follow, but I stay between you and the bear at all times. And if anything feels wrong, we're out of here." Eleanor agreed to his terms, and they began following Storm deeper into the forest, Davis maintaining his protective position while constantly scanning for additional threats. The bear led them with obvious purpose, occasionally looking back as if to ensure they were still following, his behavior so far removed from that of a normal wild animal that even the skeptical sheriff couldn't help but be amazed. After another 10 minutes of walking, they arrived at what appeared to be a small cave formed by a fallen tree and an overhanging rock formation. Storm stopped at the entrance, making a soft sound into the darkness. Luna emerged from the cave, her massive form blocking the entrance briefly, before she recognized Eleanor and Willow. The mother bear's behavior was markedly different from their previous encounters. Agitated, distressed, her movements lacking their usual deliberate calm. "Something's definitely wrong," Eleanor murmured, instinctively holding Willow closer as Luna approached them. Davis tensed, but Eleanor placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Wait," she whispered, "just watch." Luna stopped a few feet away, looking directly at Willow with what could only be described as desperation. Then, with deliberate movements, she turned and went back to the cave entrance, looking back at them expectantly. "She wants us to see Orion," Eleanor interpreted, her voice tight with emotion. "She's asking for help." "This is insane," Davis muttered, but he didn't prevent Eleanor from approaching the cave, maintaining his protective position as they drew closer to the makeshift den. Inside, partially visible in the dim light, lay Orion. The cub was curled on his side, his breathing labored and his normally bright eyes dull and half-closed. Even to Eleanor's untrained eye, it was clear that something was seriously wrong. The cub's fur was matted in places, and a strange odor emanated from him. Not the normal musky scent of a bear, but something sharper, more acrid. Willow made a distressed sound, struggling to get down from her mother's arms. "Help Orion," she insisted. "Help now." Eleanor hesitated, looking to Davis. The sheriff's face was a study in conflicting emotions, disbelief at what he was witnessing, warring with the undeniable evidence before his eyes that something truly extraordinary was unfolding. "James," she said softly, "I need to get closer to examine him. These bears are asking for our help, as impossible as that seems." Davis swallowed hard, then gave a tight nod. "I'll be right beside you. But Eleanor, I've never seen anything like this. Not in 27 years of law enforcement, not in my entire life." "Neither have I," she admitted, carefully setting Willow down but keeping a firm hold on her hand. "But it's happening, and that cub needs help." Together, they approached the cave entrance. Luna and Storm moved aside, creating a path to their ailing cub, while maintaining a watchful presence that somehow managed to convey concern rather than threat. Eleanor knelt beside Orion, Willow immediately dropping to her knees as well, and reaching out to touch the cub's fur with gentle fingers. "Sick," she repeated, her young face creased with worry. "Very sick." Eleanor carefully examined the cub, looking for obvious injuries but finding none. However, when she gently turned him to check his other side, she discovered the likely source of his illness: a small, festering wound on his right front paw, angry red and swollen with infection. "He's wounded," she told Davis, who had knelt beside her, his initial fear giving way to professional assessment of the situation. "Some kind of puncture wound that's become infected. He needs antibiotics, probably intravenous fluids too. We don't have those here, Davis pointed out. And we can't exactly take a wild bear cub to the veterinary clinic in Millfield. Eleanor bit her lip, thinking rapidly. Actually, maybe we can. Dr. Wesley, the vet who comes to Pinehaven once a month for the farmers, he's scheduled to be at the Andersons' farm today. He might be willing to help if you asked him officially. Davis considered this, glancing at the anxious parent bears who watch their every move with intelligent, hopeful eyes. You're suggesting I request a vet to treat a wild bear cub? Without authorization from wildlife management? I'm suggesting you request help for an animal in distress, Eleanor countered. One that appears to pose no threat despite being a wild species. The specifics can be determined later. Willow, who had been gently stroking Orion's head, suddenly looked up at Davis with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. Please help, she said clearly. Orion, friend. Something in the child's direct appeal seemed to tip the scales for the sheriff. He stood, taking out his radio. I'll contact Dr. Wesley, but we can't bring him here. It's too far from the road, and the terrain is too difficult for medical equipment. We need to move the cub somewhere more accessible. Eleanor looked at Luna and Storm, uncertain how to communicate this necessity to the bears. But Willow, once again displaying that uncanny connection, turned to the parent bears and spoke in simple terms that nevertheless conveyed their intentions. Orion very sick. Need doctor. Take him, make better, bring back. She pointed toward the village, then made a returning gesture toward the den. Promise. Luna made a distressed sound, moving closer to her cub, but Storm nudged her gently, making that same huffing noise they had heard earlier. The two adult bears seemed to communicate silently, another moment of apparent deliberation that defied conventional understanding of animal behavior. Finally, Luna stepped back, creating space between herself and Orion in what appeared to be reluctant permission. Eleanor carefully removed her jacket, creating a makeshift stretcher to move the cub without causing him further pain.